Something that we'll be seeing a lot more in the future is range-extended electric vehicles. Why? Because technology has something called an adoption S-curve. Basically, we invent something, we get really excited about it, and then the media reinforce a public opinion how that something will change everything in a matter of just a few years. In the end, some sort of transformation does happen, but the change takes much longer and is far more gradual than originally advertised. This is a phenomenon that has repeated itself throughout history many times. In the 1830s, for example, most people thought that railways would almost immediately revolutionize commerce, travel, and settlement. Massive investments were made, speculative market bubbles occurred, many early companies failed. In the end, railways were genuinely transformative, but building railway networks took decades. The biggest productivity gains came only after national networks were completed. 50 years later, the same thing happened with electricity. Most people expected factories and homes to be completely transformed within just a few years. Instead, factories gradually replaced steam and later combustion engines with electric motors while keeping the same layouts. For decades, transformation was minimal. Homes also adopted appliances very gradually as infrastructure expanded. Even the mighty car took decades to replace the horse. TV did not make the radio disappear. Aviation-driven tourism did not happen before the era of jet flight. And electricity did not become quote-unquote too cheap to meter after the discovery of nuclear energy. The dot-com bubble burst in 2000, and AI did not enslave humanity. Well, the jury is still out on that one, but according to history, we don't have to worry too much, because most of the revolutions of the past, they weren't just as fast, they also weren't quite as profound as initially expected. What's common to all of these technologies is that they did eventually reshape our world. But as economist Paul David famously noted, real change came only after society reorganized around the new technology, rather than just substituting one thing with another. Interestingly, the electric vehicle revolution was already heralded twice. The first time in the early 1880s, and the second around 2010 or so. The first revolution failed because back then combustion tech progressed a lot faster than electric tech. The second revolution already looks like all the previous new tech scenarios. Many early EV companies failed, and the revolution itself, it's simply not happening as fast as initially predicted. I spoke about this in a video 4 years ago, and I got a lot of comments saying how the video will age badly. Right now, when it comes to EVs, we are somewhere around here. This is something that organizational theorist Geoffrey Moore calls the chasm. It's a transition from early adopters to the early majority. This sub-transition can be particularly difficult to achieve. Overall, this entire transition will probably have multiple stages and will take a significant amount of time. We started with regular hybrids, evolved to plug-in hybrids, and the next stage will be range-extended electric vehicles. Each of these stages gradually exposes buyers to the lifestyle changes necessary to make use of a new technology. Remember, real gains came after society reorganized around the new technology. No matter how many times we are told that 90% of our daily driving is less than 60 kilometers or whatever other distance, we know that 10% of our driving is above that. And because we humans are subjective, emotional beings, those 10% can be more important than the 90%. A time will come when I will unexpectedly need to be somewhere important for me at a certain time. And if I can't because I needed to charge my car for whatever amount of time, I will hate my car and will think about replacing it regardless of how many times it served me well before that. The exception can be just as or even more important than the average use case scenario. Both a plug-in hybrid and a range-extended electric vehicle need to be charged. The difference is the role played by the combustion engine. Different legislations and manufacturers will treat things differently, but the definition that objectively makes the most sense is that a range-extended electric vehicle is not a hybrid because only the electric motor has a mechanical connection with the wheels. The combustion engine is never connected to the wheels, and thus it never drives them. All the engine ever does is charge the battery. Another important distinction is that the majority of the car's range is electric, and the engine only charges the battery as a backup when the electric range is almost depleted. Here are 4 cars. Of these 4 cars, only one is a true range-extended vehicle. The Chevy Volt is not a true range-extended car because most of its range comes from gasoline. Something else that disqualifies it is the fact that it had a clutch which could connect the engine to the wheels on the highway. The Volt is therefore a series parallel plug-in hybrid rather than a range-extended EV. The Mazda MX-30R EV uses an 830cc single-rotor naturally aspirated Wankel engine to charge the batteries. The engine is never connected to the wheels, but the majority of this car's range comes from the combustion engine and the large gasoline tank. The battery can be charged from the grid, thus it is a series plug-in hybrid. The Nissan Qashqai e-Power also isn't a range-extended EV. The engine is never connected to the wheels, but it does run most of the time. We have a tiny battery which is almost constantly charged by the engine. The battery can never be charged from the grid, and thus the electric-only range is minimal. This makes the Nissan e-Power a series non-plug-in hybrid. This leaves us with the BMW i3 REX or Rex. It's a car using a 650cc two-cylinder Kymco-made engine out of a BMW Maxi scooter. The engine has no mechanical connection with the wheels. Now, over the years, the range and the size of the battery pack increased, but electric only always accounted for the majority of the total range. The small petrol engine and tank were meant only as a sort of backup to charge the battery when an unexpected scenario occurs. However, the BMW i3 Rex cannot be considered a sales success. In the beginning, it accounted for a majority of the sales of the i3, but later, as battery capacity increased, its sales plummeted before it eventually became discontinued before the battery electric i3. Observing this trend, one might argue that range-extended vehicles are pointless and that we should focus on improving and maximizing battery tech instead of wasting precious vehicle space on small combustion engines and gas tanks. Yes, that argument made sense 10 years ago, when we were in the early stages of modern battery tech and battery capacities were growing rapidly, so some people started predicting how this rate of growth will continue, I guess indefinitely or something. Of course, that didn't happen, and nowadays we have realistic annual battery capacity growth of anywhere between 3 to 8%. On top of that, most people who bought EVs like the i3 10 years ago were innovators. And according to research, they have money, which allows them to take risks. And that's a catch-22, isn't it? Anyway, most of them bought EVs as their second car. They used it to do the school run or groceries or other sub-60 kilometer daily tasks. And then they used their other combustion-based car for weekend or holiday trips or other longer journeys, unexpected or otherwise. But now the game for EVs is different. Now we are trying to cross into the majority, and here most people don't want, don't need, or can't afford 2 cars, or they need 2 cars where both can do unexpected longer journeys. People here can't take as many risks. They need a promise of something that can do everything when they need it. They need versatility. They need familiar benefits with new and interesting advantages. They need a range-extended EV, which will help them further reorganize their lives around this new tech while at the same time fostering further infrastructure development. But a new range-extended EV for today cannot be the same recipe from 10 years ago. Our 4 cars have engines of different sizes and even different anatomy. Now, the Wankel is an emissions and economy nightmare, so we'll eliminate it for the sake of our mental health. We are left with 3 piston engines. The power output of all 3 engines comes in the form of rotation. The piston reciprocates, and we use the rod and the crank to turn that reciprocation into a rotational output so that we can drive a transmission and the wheels. So what's the point of a rotational power output in the i3 and the Qashqai if the engine never drives the wheels? After the cylinder head and the block, the crankshaft is the largest and heaviest engine part. When it comes to price, it can even be the most expensive part because crankshafts must be made from high-quality materials and produced to extremely tight tolerances. The rods are also expensive and they add weight, but what the rotating assembly does that hurts a range-extended vehicle most is that it takes up massive space. When you observe an engine, you can see that on average 50% of it is just the rotating assembly. 50% of the engine does nothing other than convert reciprocation into rotation. If you don't need to drive the wheels, then this rotational output adds nothing but consumes so much. I know what you're thinking, we need rotational output to drive the rotor of our generator to make electricity for the batteries. So, you never heard of linear generators? All you need is a piston and a linear generator. Attach magnets and have them move back and forth past copper coils, and voila! You are making electricity without a crank, rods, or a giant heavy engine block. Believe it or not, the first piston engine that the man himself, Nikolaus Otto, built was a 3-piston engine. He built it together with Eugene Langen, and combustion occurred below the piston and shot it up, while a rack and pinion assembly captured the motion and turned it into rotation. This engine generated the first sales for Otto and Langen, which secured the funds necessary to continue development and eventually create the 4-stroke engine as we know it today. Now, in the range-extended context, there are 2 main approaches to the 3-piston engine. The first one is a single-piston anatomy. The piston moves back and forth, and we have combustion occurring in an alternating fashion on the 2 outer opposing sides of the piston. The main benefit of this anatomy is its incredibly compact nature. This is a design that received quite a bit of R&D at the Newcastle University, and Toyota's R&D center also worked on what's basically half of this anatomy, with combustion occurring only on one side. Toyota's approach is less power dense, but it is safer and it's easier to achieve good reliability with it. The main challenge with the combustion on both sides is ensuring that the piston never slams into the cylinder head. Since we don't have the crankshaft to strictly limit the range of motion of the piston, abnormal combustion on one side means that the piston might be propelled with excessive force to the other side, causing it to slam into the cylinder head and bending valves in the process. The software control system can react to this by altering timing, injection, or even increasing electrical load in the coils, but it is extremely difficult to react within the time frame of half a piston stroke to prevent engine damage. Toyota's approach is safer because on the other side we have a gas spring. Essentially, it's just a cushion affair that absorbs the forces off the piston and also springs back to return the piston to its starting position. This prevents engine damage because once air is compressed to some extent, compressing it further requires exponentially greater amounts of energy, which is why a gas spring can safely absorb massive forces and prevent metal-to-metal contact. You may have noticed that this engine uses valves, and you may have wondered how do we drive the camshaft to open the valves if there's no crankshaft. Well, the design actually relies either on pneumatic or hydraulic valve control. Something like Fiat's multi-air has already been successfully in the market for quite some time, so the idea isn't as far-fetched as it once was. The other approach to the 3-piston anatomy is an opposed design, which leads to good efficiency and robustness but isn't quite as compact. One of the benefits of this design is that we don't need valves or valve actuators. Instead, we use ports. This means less moving parts and friction. It does, however, create some potential emissions and wear challenges, but they are far from being unsolvable. The real disadvantage of this ported design is that it requires some form of forced induction to force exhaust gas out and push the intake charge in. But even that can be avoided by relying on a low-temperature, flameless oxidation reaction instead of traditional combustion, which is something that a company called Mainspring has successfully brought to market with its free piston generators. In the opposed anatomy, we have combustion in the middle that pushes the two pistons and associated magnets outward, and we have gas springs at either end. This makes the design longer overall, but prevents collisions regardless of combustion quality. The opposed design makes up for its reduced compactness by offering inherently better balance. The non-opposed design is obviously unbalanced, which leads to very noticeable vibrations and shaking. This can be reduced by using two cylinders moving in opposite directions. This leads to better balance, but a rocking couple still remains. The most compact, perfectly balanced design using this non-opposed anatomy is a square 4, although this creates its own intake and exhaust manifold challenges. In contrast, the opposed anatomy is perfectly balanced in standalone form and remains perfectly balanced and scalable regardless of the number of cylinders. By the way, all free-piston engines have a complete absence of secondary vibrations regardless of anatomy and number of cylinders, since they don't have connecting rods. Another benefit of a rodless anatomy is no side loading of the cylinder wall. The combustion force acts perfectly along the cylinder axis. This reduces both friction and wear. The final major benefit shared by all free-piston designs is an easily adjustable compression ratio, which makes them multi-fuel capable. Because there is no crankshaft to define and limit piston motion, the start-off combustion is determined entirely by spark or fuel injection and electromagnetic load. These parameters are changed while the engine is running, and changing them allows combustion and compression to start later or earlier, which can create a very wide range of compression ratios, allowing the same engine to run on gasoline, diesel, LPG, hydrogen, or other fuels. Overall, free-piston engines don't have the safety net of a flywheel and a crankshaft, and instead rely on very fast sensors and powerful computer control to offer more efficiency and versatility in a dramatically more compact package. And unlike many of the other things that I covered on this channel, they are not a pipe dream. They're already out there. Many companies have invested significant R&D, and some of them even have an established business with commercialized products and actual clients. So are we going to see a free piston engine in a mass-produced REV in the near future? Well, I think the chances are very high that at least a few OEMs will give them a try. And if that does happen, I'll be sure to boast how I successfully predicted the future. If not, well, I'll just keep quiet and this video will be long forgotten by then. As always, thanks a lot for watching. I'll be seeing you soon with more fun and useful stuff on the theorist channel.